If you've been on my channel in the past 3 weeks, you've probably seen some really quick solo GM speedruns done on Solar Hunter. I have a 1443 Platinum Lake of Shadows, and I just did a 2014 Heist Moon Battlegrounds. This is the first season since GMs have been out where Solar Hunters have actually been contenders for beating solo GMs relatively quickly, so I figured I'd make a video going over the build that I use since I get a lot of comments asking for it. The best thing about this build is that being in a fire team doesn't actually affect the build at all, which means that it's just as effective in a team as it is solo. Additionally, the core pieces of the build are easily obtainable. If you enjoy the build, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any future uploads that I do. So we're going to start with the subclass setup because the exotic armor pieces and weapons that you can use can vary depending on which ones you prefer, but I think the subclass setup is a lot more linearized. So in terms of dodge, I highly recommend you run the Marksman's Dodge. You can use Gambler's Dodge, but melee kills while radiant automatically give us our melee back anyway using one of the aspects, so in lower level content, getting that melee back won't be too hard, and in GMs, you're probably not using your melee to get kills anyway. For the melee though, I would recommend Knife Trick, but proximity isn't a bad alternative. Just know that proximity can be shot out of the air by enemies and can kill you. For grenade, you do want healing grenades, and then for aspects, I would recommend Knock 'em Down and On Your Mark. Knock 'em Down buffs our solar supers, and it also lets our throwing knives get refunded while radiant on those final blows. On Your Mark gives us increased handling and reload speed for a short duration on precision final blows, or after you use your class ability. I'm not a big gunpowder gamble fan because I don't like the risk of blowing myself up when I try to use a healing nade and instead I throw this explosive stick, but if you like gunpowder gamble, it's not a bad aspect, especially after the buff a couple seasons ago, so you're more than welcome to use it if you so choose. In terms of fragments, due to the artifact mods this season, namely Rays of Precision, Flint Striker, and Kindling Trigger, I recommend that you focus on a Scorch Ignition build. My recommendations for fragments is that you run Singeing to get your class ability back very quickly after you scorch targets, Empyrean to extend the restoration and radiant buffs, Char and Ashes to apply more scorch to targets and inflict scorch upon ignitions, as well as Eruption to increase the size of our ignitions. Again, these fragments are my suggestions. There are other choices that you can use, and let me know in the comments below which fragments you prefer to run on your Solar Hunter. In terms of stats, resilience should always be your top priority in PvE, so boost that to 100 straight away. Discipline is next so that we always have a panic healing nade if needed, and recovery would be my third choice. You do not need mobility on this because of Singeing. Even with 20 mobility, you will get your dodge back very quickly. Intellect is useless in PvE since most of your super gains come from defeating targets, and strength is kind of mid because you get your melee back on kills while radiant anyway. So in terms of exotics to pair this with, I would say there are two big choices, Celestial Nighthawk and Lucky Pants. In lower tier content, Shards of Galanor isn't bad where you can be consistently getting those melee kills. You can actually watch my Shards of Galanor video from earlier this season if you want to focus on this. However, the other choice I see people suggest is Ophidius Spaith, and I don't think it's worth it because in higher tier content, you're not going to be using those melee for kills anyway, and in lower tier content, your melee is just going to kill the enemies in the first place. Foe Tracer isn't a bad choice either, but I think Celestial and Lucky Pants are just better than Foe Tracer because Foe Tracer only buffs weapon damage, not ability damage. Celestial Nighthawk did get buffed this season and is what I have been using. When I use Celestial Nighthawk, I pair it with Fixed Odds from Duality, which will be the weekly dungeon next week, January 9th. I run this with Field Prep and Incandescent. And then I use either Polaris Lance or Wish Ender. Polaris Lance is very good for an easy, consistent GM clear this season, and allows for insane ad clear with the Ignition build. Wish Ender is a good alternative, and frankly feels a lot better to use than Polaris Lance, but it's a bit slower. Lucky Pants requires a hand cannon to use, so your choices here would either be Malfeasance or Ins Law, which will be the Nightfall weapon next week during Psyops Cosmodrome, or Ariana's Vow. Since we're on Solar, Ariana's Vow would work decently well, but the issue with this one is that it requires special ammo and it only goes up to 300% rather than the 600% of the other two. So just keep that in mind. I'd still recommend Fixed Odds though as your heavy weapon because this lets you go absolutely crazy on the trash mobs in GMs. Your non-intrinsic champion weapons are anti-barrier while you're radiant, so something like Polaris Lance is basically intrinsic anti-barrier anyway this season, and Ignitions cause Unstoppable, which Polaris Lance does, so Polaris Lance can cover both anti-barrier and Unstoppable this season. If you do choose to use Polaris Lance, you would only need to have an overload stun available to get all 3 champions covered. Something like a Chill Clip Riptide would work well, or if you're okay running double primary, an auto rifle or a pulse rifle works just fine. You could also run a rocket as well, but I like the machine gun more. If you're using Lucky Pants, Warden's Law would be unstoppable with the hand cannon artifact mod, Malfeasance is intrinsic unstoppable, and Ariana's is intrinsic anti-barrier, so again, you just need something to deal with overload champions. 3 GMs this season have overload champions, which are Birthplace, Corrupted, and Hypernet, so just keep that in mind if you're running one of those 3, and you should also just check what your teammates are running beforehand to see if you even are required to put overload on. Okay, mod time, awesome. So obviously with the Lightfall mod change, this part has become so streamlined, but I'll still mention it anyway for anyone who is unsure what to pair with this. So on your helmet, you're going to want 2 heavy ammo finders and 1 harmonic siphon. The finders will let you continue to spam heavy like crazy, and by having 2 of them, you get more per brick. If you're in a fire team, you might consider swapping one of those finders for a scout, but I'll leave that choice to you. On your gauntlets, I run Harmonic Loader, Harmonic Dexterity, and then Impact Induction, but these mods on your arms are really your choice. On your chest, you're going to want to base this off of the activity you're doing in terms of resist mods. Do not use Emergency Reinforcement. That mod is a scam. Use the non-armor charge resist mods. The reason why you don't want to use Emergency Reinforcement is that it's only active when you have broken your shields, it's only a 10% DR, and it requires armor charges. It also costs 3. The other mods cost 2, 15%, always active. I think the choice here is quite obvious. Legs, Recuperation, Solar Surge or Kinetic Surge, and Harmonic Scav are my recommendations. Kinetic Surge will buff Golden Gun damage, but Solar Surge will buff your heavy weapon. I like Solar Surge more, but this is your choice. Class item, Reaper, Reaper, Reaper. Reaper is so good on this build because you'll be spamming your class ability so much with Singeing, and then you can pair this with something like Powerful Attraction, which will then work with those siphons from above and Reaper to constantly be healing with Recuperation. This also will be giving you those surges from those orbs nearby that you can then pair with something like Time Dilation to get that 15-second surge instead of 10 seconds. This season also has an insane set of solar artifact mods with Flint Striker, Kindling Trigger, Heart of the Flame, Revitalizing Blast, and Rays of Precision. These mods are very, very, very good to pair with the setup. You should use them. The gameplay loop, as with most D2 builds nowadays, is quite simple. This one is you want to get Radiant using Polaris Lance headshots. You only need 3 of them to get Radiant with Polaris Lance, and then you start spamming your machine gun on trash mobs, or if there's a large group of ads, you can use Polaris Lance ignitions to cause that ignition. Think of like the Heist Moon Battlegrounds entrance. Once you need to reload your machine gun, simply dodge to reload it instead, and continue to go crazy. I hope you enjoy this build, and if you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more.